Good morning. This is Valerie Henning-Piedmont, Superintendent of the Brewster Central School District. Welcome to our podcast on the book, Most Likely to Succeed, Preparing Our Kids for the Innovation Era by Tony Wagner and Ted Dintersmith. This podcast includes pairs of administrators in the district sharing the big ideas that we've identified in each chapter. Book studies are underway in the district and will continue through this school year so that we can involve as many educators as possible, as well as parents and students. If you are interested in joining a book study to explore this text more deeply, please feel free to email me or any administrator in the district.
And hello, this is Michelle Gosh, the Assistant Superintendent. You're probably not aware of why we selected Most Likely to Succeed, Preparing Our Kids for the Innovation Era, to launch our Strategic Coherence Plan that was adopted and approved last spring. As a district, we are reading this book to develop a common understanding of why the 21st century skills that these authors identified are aligned to those in our Strategic Coherence Plan are essential for all students. We are also using this book to understand the demands of the innovation-driven era that are described in the book and how exposure to these skills will prepare children for life, work, and learning.
According to these authors, there are certain 21st century skills that are essential for all students to have to function in the innovation-driven era that produce the following: driverless cars, software that can take raw data and write newspaper stories or business reports, self-service tablets and mobile robots, drones that deliver packages, or intelligent robots that can replace workers. These examples are referenced by the authors and are symbolic of the innovation-driven era that is still rapidly changing even as we record this podcast.
The 21st century skills cited in our plan include critical thinking, problem solving, communication, collaboration, perseverance, resilience, flexibility and adaptability, and civic and ethical responsibility. Without these cross-cutting skills, our students would be ill-equipped for life, work, and learning beyond high school. While not everyone has participated in a book study, we wanted to make this podcast available for those who want to be part of this experience so that they are engaged in the big ideas of the book, but who may not be able to participate in a book study. In addition, we also hope that this podcast will encourage you to read the book.
Chapter 1, Our Education DNA.
Hello, I'm Dean Berardo.
I'm Frank Zemperle, principal at JFK Elementary School.
And I am John Conroy, assistant principal of JFK Elementary.
And we are here today to discuss chapters 1 and 2 of Most Likely to Succeed. Chapter 1 is titled Our Education DNA. Education is an important part of the culture of America. As stated on page 19, Americans worship at the altar of academic credentials. We live in a society obsessed with people's degrees. Do you have a high school diploma? What was your SAT score? How many advanced placement classes have you taken, and did you get a 5 on the exam? What college or university did you attend? What was your major, your GPA? Is your GPA high enough to get the top-paying job that you want? These questions are asked as if the answers provide critical insight into a person's intrinsic value. We, as Americans, also spend increasing amounts of time and money to obtain these credentials, whether in the form of rising kindergarten through grade 12 costs, standardized testing, college tuition levels, the time that we spend in school, the amount of homework we get or spend helping our children with, tutoring fees, or the booming test prep industry. However, something is seriously amiss. Despite our enormous investment in education, the majority of our students lack the necessary skills to get a good job, be an informed citizen, or in some way that defies the crisp definition, be a good and happy person.
When we were kids, our education was fact-heavy, and we were educated to get ready for a career. Usually people stayed with a single company or an organization for most of their life, but things have changed drastically. Now students who graduate high school can have up to 15 different careers in their lifetime. As quoted on page 20 of the book, educated adults in our modern world need to be able to ask great questions, critically analyze information, form independent opinions, collaborate, and communicate effectively. These are the skills essential for both careers and citizenship. What we thought was essential for a quality education is evolving into something much different. So our paradigm for what schools are is in a state of transition. And this is where the Brewster Strategic Coherence Plan comes in. It's an essential and pivotal document guiding us forward. In this plan, it has been identified by various community stakeholders that there is a growing consensus regarding the skills that are needed for all. Students who are educated in Brewster should be able to problem solve, communicate and collaborate, think critically, be resilient, demonstrate perseverance, be adaptable and flexible, and have a sense of ethical and civic responsibility.
Pages 25, 26, and 27. On page 25, a quote: "An assembly line model of education emerged at the turn of the 20th century that could batch process far larger numbers of students. It excelled at what it was designed to do: train millions of young adults to perform repetitive tasks quickly, retain modest amounts of content, and keep errors to a minimum." That was the 20th century. Time has passed, and we have moved on. At the time, it was what the economy needed and called for. Today, we know our world is much different. Today we need, another quote, smart creatives. We need problem solvers. After all, our economy today calls for it. In order to learn differently, we need to teach differently. Problem solving is about the process, not about how many facts a student can recall. What matters is how students apply the information they have in a constructive, creative manner. And it is our responsibility and job to see that they have the skill set to accomplish that.
Chapter 2. The Purpose of Education.
Hello, this is Nikki Horler. I'm the high school principal here at Brewster, and today we're here to discuss our big ideas for the purpose of education, the chapter 2 and the purpose of education in the book Most Likely to Succeed by Tony Wagner and Ted Dintersmith. I'm here with Amy Osula, who is
the Assistant Director of Pupil Personnel Services. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here with Nikki, and we will be discussing our ideas.
Great. So Tony Wagner discusses that knowledge is a commodity. Anyone can Google just about anything quicker than the average person can recall the fact. It is not what you know anymore, it's what you can do with it. And that's one of the key ideas throughout the entire book. If you can just Google the information, is it important to spend long periods of time learning that information? Or is it more important to further expand upon that knowledge and teach students how to think critically? We should be looking at how and what we teach in our schools. Is the average teaching approach one that actually helps our students learn, or are we just helping students to memorize vast amounts of material that we expect them to regurgitate at a later date and time? What a teacher teaches is directly related to the history behind the school and a school's mission statement. When we look at schools and the skills we value, the most critical thinking skills and innovation are two of the ideas that are directly tied to our strategic coherence plan here at Brewster, but also two key ideas that permeate the book of Most Likely to Succeed. Other key ideas are passion and purpose, cognitive skills and social skills, character formation, and creating responsible citizens. Those ideas are what good schooling is all about. Classrooms should not focus on these set of skills. If classrooms do not focus on these skills, they are inherently doing a disservice to the students when they enter adulthood. In a classroom, a teacher in today's world focuses strictly on content. Mission statements don't highlight content, in fact, but highlight what should be going on in our classrooms. When we observe the way students are taught and evaluated, the focus is on the game of school and how well the students can memorize specified content. Schools are organized by subject matter, and that has remained similar since 1893. Again, what is the disservice we do to children if we don't, in fact, change the footprint of how we teach and what schools look like? As a student, you are considered gifted if you can memorize vast amounts of information of low-level content material. If you are good at memorization, you are gifted, and creates a tiered system where everyone else is just plain ordinary. Some years ago, Tony Wagner did an experiment at Lawrenceville High School, and they did a simple experiment where in June, students took a specific science final. The average was 87%. In September, they modified the test. A simpler version, in fact, was given to the same students, and the average on that test was 57%. Not one student retained mastery of the content. What does that tell you about rote memorization in a high school setting? We need to clarify the goals of education. In 1893, the purpose was clear. Teach students cognitive skills, train them to perform repetitive tasks quickly and error-free, and eliminate creativity and innovation from classrooms. What is the purpose really today? It's to prepare students for a knowledge economy where we are looking at innovative thinkers, critical thinkers, and people who can collaborate seamlessly in today's world. Today's world is vastly different from what it was 100 years ago. Routine tasks and knowledge acquisition is increasingly handled by computers. To be the most likely to succeed, adults need to be creative and innovative problem solvers. Obviously, students need to master some level of content and master core skills, but in a real way that reflects real learning and retention. It is not reform, but reimagination that needs to happen in a school. Our current education system is obsolete. As a country, our focus needs to be on the innovative race and to get all schools to reimagine their purpose for education.
Well, thank you, Nikki. This is Amy Osuli again, and I'm just going to add on to Nikki's ideas that she shared with us today. My first idea is about discovering passions and purpose. Wagner says, a young adult who is going through the motions of school is a young adult who isn't learning or developing skills. This quote stuck out to me a lot, and in addition, the comparison discussed in Chapter 2 about preschool students versus high school students is something you can't deny after watching Rachel Wolf's documentary, Losing Ourselves. The younger the students are, the more they are full of passion, curiosity, and exploration. Parents and teachers can play an invaluable role in helping students find their passions and purpose. An engaged student who feels there is a purpose to the school day is learning and retaining information. The world around us has changed. Unless there is a shift in focus on what students love to do, there will be little hope for their success in the innovation era. My next idea is developing critical skills. Imagine if students' report cards were organized by critical skills, not subject matter. Students will be assessed on the 7 critical skills of the 21st century, also described in our district's Strategic Coherence Plan. Problem solving, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, resilience, adaptability, flexibility, social and emotional balance, and ethical civil responsibility. The idea in Chapter 2 is that with these critical skills, any young adult can make their way in the world no matter how challenging their environment or economic circumstances. If we help students grow their passions into competencies, they can thrive. I loved when Wagner said, we need to help students develop decisive life advantages, things they are so good at and so passionate about that they stand out in adding value to their community or employer. Lastly, I would like to focus on inspiration, what it means to appropriately prepare a student for life learning and the world beyond school has been transformed. As Wagner mentions, our world is surrounded by amazing. We now have to figure out a way to make sure this surrounding inspiration makes its way to our Brewster students. To make any real progress, we need to tap into the passions of students, help them develop critical skills outlined in our Strategic Coherence Plan, and inspire them. And Brewster has the main ingredients needed to make this meaningful shifts in what we teach and how students learn, engaged students and motivated teachers.
Chapter 3. What's at Stake?
Hello, this is Valerie Henning Piedmont, Superintendent of Schools, and I'm going to share 3 big ideas from Chapter 3 of this text and why each idea is relevant to our Strategic Coherence Plan. The first big idea is on page 58 in paragraph 3. The authors argue that there is a bigger crisis in public education in this country that can't be blamed simply on low-performing schools and teachers' unions. The real challenge is that schools are still places where students spend too much time sitting and listening, covering irrelevant content, doing mindless tasks, and taking too many ill-conceived standardized tests. This, the authors contend, robs educators of the opportunity to infuse creativity and innovation in our schools. We need to focus on reinventing education, thus ensuring that children have a chance to succeed in life, work, and learning in this innovation-driven century. This is relevant to our Strategic Coherence Plan because the goal is all about minimizing the focus on passive and rote learning by shifting to problem solving, collaboration, critical thinking, and the important non-cognitive skills that are equally essential for our students to acquire, such as perseverance and resilience. The second big idea is on page 63 in the first paragraph. The authors talk about how it is no longer likely that anyone will work for a lifetime in a large company. Our students who will live beyond this century, which is only another 84 years, will have between 10 to 15 jobs at the minimum and will also change professions. The authors sound the alarm that if you can't invent and reinvent your own job along with specific competencies, you will risk being chronically underemployed. This is certainly relevant to our Strategic Coherence Plan in that our goal is to prepare children for a life where many of the jobs that they will be doing have not been invented. We shouldn't look at our role as educators to prepare children for a specific job or what we think they will need for college, but rather we can do the best by equipping them with these cross-cutting skills and competencies like critical thinking, resilience, problem solving, and adaptability, just to name a few, so that they can survive and prosper in this dynamic century. The final big idea from this chapter can be found on page 73 in the second paragraph. The authors focus on the notion of how to prepare students for citizenship. They reference the education pioneer Deborah Meyer, who I not only admire, but I interned with her when I spent a year at the Central Park East Secondary School as a graduate student. The authors reference Debbie as providing the best definition of critical thinking described through what she calls the 5 habits of mind. These 5, listed on page 73, help students to develop habits of asking the right questions when examining evidence, making connections to other things and looking for patterns, considering alternate viewpoints about issues and applying conjecture when listening to arguments or making arguments. This is particularly relevant to our Strategic Coherence Plan because as citizens, learners and workers, our students, are going to have to process tons of information which may be in conflict with their beliefs or what they perceive to be right or wrong. They have to be able to make ethical decisions and think critically about what they read and hear. Without these skills firmly in place, they will make some decisions that will have long-term and potentially negative consequences for the country and for their communities.
Hi, this is Robin Young, principal of CV Star Intermediate School, and I too am going to share 3 key ideas from Chapter 3 and why they're relevant. The chapter begins by dispelling 2 myths about our education, and this is really important to note as we in the United States, and certainly here in Brewster, are framing our students' education in terms of skills and personal qualities that will contribute to our students' productivity in the future. A future that holds jobs that we have not even yet dreamed of. The first myth is that we, the United States, has performed poorly on international test ratings. On page 54, it's shared that we compete against nations that take test prep tests for kids so seriously that teen suicides are rampant. There's also evidence that many of these countries limit their sample size to better prepared students. We as a nation and district are committed to providing the best education, making transparent the assessment scores of every student, not just those who are handpicked. On page 56, just 2 examples of how we excel in areas that other countries strive to achieve reveals that at a time of the publication of Most Likely to Succeed, the United States received 353 Nobel Prizes compared to 21 of the closest competitor, Japan. We had 619,000 patents compared to 240,000, again, of our closest competitor, Japan. The second myth is that we have to fix our underperforming schools with charter schools or using a business model. On pages 56 and 57, it's shared that the Stanford Center for Research Education Outcomes shows that as many charters, 31%, underperform public school comparables in math as outperform. The numbers were slightly better for literacy, but the bottom line is that the majority of charter schools are no better or worse than their public school counterparts. We in Brewster are focused on equalizing the playing field for all students and providing the highest level of professional development to cultivate a faculty that will be able to teach and, more importantly, have our children learn the skills they'll need for meaningful careers and give them the tools to be responsible citizens. A third key idea in Chapter 3 is the impact of technology on our lives in education. On page 61, the impact of technology is acknowledged and how it went from being a communications protocol used by a handful of labs to a force reshaping every aspect of our world. The quote is, "The convergence of technology means that everyone has resources beyond what even the most powerful organizations could draw on just 3 short decades ago. Jobs that were the backbone of the old economy, assembly jobs, office administrators, information processors, have vanished and been replaced by automated or outsources solutions. As educators, at home and in schools, we must look into the future, which is still hazy, and teach our children the enduring skills that are outlined in our Brewster Strategic Coherence Plan. Critical skills, problem solving, communication, resilience, and more. These will pave the road to any career that our children choose to take in their future in the 21st century."
Chapter 4. The Formative Years, K through 12.
Hello, this is John Krauskopf, Director of Technology and Innovation.
And I'm Michelle Gosh, Assistant Superintendent. And we are going to share some big ideas from Chapter 4 of Most Likely to Succeed and why each idea is relevant to our Strategic Coherence Plan. The first big idea from the chapter is the concept that the math skills and curriculum that we teach currently may not be as relevant as it could be for the occupations that most people will choose in their lifetimes. One example of this is the emphasis that high schools and colleges have on advanced placement calculus classes, as opposed to an AP statistics or typical stats class. The need to understand and the ability to critically analyze data in multiple forms is something that is essential for our students, and what would be found in a typical statistics class. However, we're currently missing that.
Yeah, you know, Michelle, Chapter 4 really takes aim at mathematics and how it is taught in the nation's schools. Yet there's also a close examination of what takes place in English classes, particularly writing. One noteworthy reference is the value of writing for what we call an authentic audience. The authors point out successful programs, such as a writer's workshop, and contrast that high-quality program with the premise that our model of education revolves around what makes life easy for test designers, but not what's best for kids. So rather than continuing down this meaningless path, it's important to provide our students with opportunities to write for authentic audiences in a variety of genres.
And that idea of assessment carries forward to the middle school years. You know, we talked about high school and college, but one point of emphasis in this chapter is that middle school math and the relevance of the skills and the concepts that are learned during those years is what most people need for success in college and the workforce beyond. Within our book talks that we had, actually you and I co-facilitated one, there was a lot of talk amongst teachers, especially in grades 3 through 8, about how our New York State assessments hinder some of the really professional license that teachers would like to take to make math more engaging. I think we need to do some work as a system, not just with math, but with all content areas K-12 to make sure that our curriculum, instruction, and assessments are aligned to the 21st century skills that students need.
Yeah, well, that and the idea that we continue to add more and more to our curricula without removing what's outdated or no longer necessary, that's amplified in this current climate of rapid change. The authors provide a powerful metaphor to drive this home, pointing out that many of today's automobiles, which come equipped with automatic parallel parking technology, as a result, some of these states are no longer having students, they're no longer requiring parallel parking. So the authors surmise that if our math educators designed our driving tests many of our teenagers would still be required to memorize definitions about how to crank start an old Model T car. So letting go of content and skills which are no longer relevant, that's essential.
So we would see that letting go within our curriculum, but also in our assessments. So another big idea is the concept of assessment versus testing. So as a national educational system, we test constantly with the emphasis on summative testing, meaning, at the end of the unit, a teacher would give a grade. But we know that is not really the best way to improve student learning. As a system, really as a country, we need to shift our focus from testing to assessing, with assessment consisting of ongoing and timely feedback that helps students see their growth over time and look at themselves differently as learners, instead of viewing their capability as a number or a letter grade. Wagner and Dintersmith, the authors of the book, ask us to really think about preparing students for life, not simply for the next test.
Yeah, and that's interesting, really preparing them for life. In the chapter, one part that stood out for me also is what the authors refer to as an opportunity cost. They postulate that our choice for the future of education can focus either on low-level tasks and memorization, or we can choose to leverage the resources available to our students. These resources include smartphones and computers and the nearly ubiquitous access to the internet that is what makes up the 21st century. Now, this is important because the focus shifts from completing menial tasks that can be handled more effectively by technology to allowing our learners to learn how to learn, to communicate effectively, collaborate productively and effectively with others, and even to affect change in our organizations and society. That's a pretty stark contrast, and it leaves little doubt about where we should focus our efforts.
Chapter 5, The Gold Ring, the College Degree.
Hello, this is John Clark. I'm the principal of H.H. Wells Middle School.
And this is Christian De Jesus, the assistant principal of H.H. Wells Middle School.
And today we're going to share 3 key ideas and why they are relevant from Chapter 5. Idea 1. Having a bachelor's degree no longer certifies that the graduate has any specific qualifications, is capable of any real intellectual depth, possesses basic workplace skills, or demonstrates personal maturity. That was on page 157. This quote is important because it points out that a bachelor's degree, despite being extremely expensive to attain, no longer proves that the graduate has a marketable skill set. This is particularly worrisome to me as my son is just entering college for the first time. It is expensive to send him to college, and it is my hope that he will come away from his experience with a much greater intellectual understanding and curiosity of the world. Of course, I would also like him to be able to get a good job and to be able to contribute to society. Idea number 2. Many seniors graduate without being able to write well enough to satisfy their employers, also on page 157. This is important because it demonstrates that even though we are spending more and more time and money on the ELA and math testing, students are still graduating without the ability to write properly. Even when they have spent 4 years in college, they still cannot communicate effectively in writing. As a former English teacher, this bothers me greatly. When I started teaching English many years ago, we focused much more on exploring literature, analyzing writing, and engaging in creativity. However, with the testing environment that has now been around for quite some time, teachers are much more concerned with having students write very prescribed answers to fulfill tasks. This takes a lot of the fun out of writing. And then idea 3, we learn from employers how creativity and imagination have been schooled out of them. This is important because we live in a complex world where we need to be able to be creative in our thinking. A lack of creativity also leads people into a place where they are afraid to take chances. Some of the greatest, most enduring periods in history have been marked by creativity and imagination. When we teach kids to be creative, we are opening up their minds to new ideas. If we take this away from them, we are taking away their ability to think for themselves, and this is not good for society as a whole.
Thank you for sharing your ideas, John. Idea 1. The emotional damage the hunt for elite college degrees wreaks on kids is important, but we should be every bit as concerned with the damage being done to the kids shut out of this hunt, either because of family poverty, lousy K-12 educations, or a steady stream of mediocre test scores, inappropriately equated to being inferior. This is on page 153. This is important because either category you fall into, the student pursuing the elite college or the student that is not good enough, is very damaging to the way the student feels about him or herself. This perception of elite causes students to put a tremendous amount of pressure on standardized tests and really can take a toll on their self-esteem and even self-worth. Idea 2. Far too many college students graduate without developing the capability to think critically and creatively, speak and write coherently and clearly, solve problems, comprehend complex issues, accept responsibility and accountability, take the perspective of others, or meet the expectations of employers. This quote is on page 157. This is important because having a college degree no longer guarantees an employer that the potential employee qualifies for the job. 20% of college graduates are lost when it comes to the basic quantitative skills, comparing and contrasting, comprehension, and most could not read a complex book. This is very worrisome. Idea 3. We live in a world where people use the college credential as a time-efficient sorting tool, a way to, quote-unquote, peg a person. This is important because it is really symbolic of the prejudices and perceptions that the more elite college, the better the potential employee. An elite college degree acts almost as a free pass or benefit of the doubt. GPA and test scores are sometimes used as a measure. This is troublesome because it is not reflective of the entire skill set a person has to offer to a potential employer.
Chapter 6. Teaching, Learning, and Assessing.
Hello, this is Kieran Stack. I'm the assistant principal here at Brewster High School, and I'm going to share with you 3 big ideas from Chapter 6 and why I feel each idea is relevant to our Strategic Coherence Plan. My main ideas will take the form of questions that I developed after reading Chapter 6. The first question that I want to address is, how do we move away from the lecture format that is so characteristic of so many high school classes to a more student-driven environment? This is an important issue because we want our students to become more independent in the real world they're about to enter, where things will not always be handed to them on a plate. It is not easy for a teacher to step back and let students control the discussion. The move this year at the high school has been to encourage teachers to give some of that control back to the student and be more of a facilitator for students. I recently observed 2 classes where teachers were doing this, and it was impressive to watch. It was impressive to watch students thrive in that kind of environment where students' opinions were valued, and they were also involved in some very meaningful debates and discussions. We continue to encourage our teachers to work in this kind of model so that our students can develop their critical thinking skills even more. The second main idea, the question is, why do we have an education system that appears to focus on the success of the standardized test industry rather than the success of our own students? This is an important issue because the testing industry does not give us a real sense of what students are capable of without being tested. In recent years, there has been some pushback from school boards as far as some of the testing is concerned. How do we create situations for our students so that they are not constantly tested? Over the past few years at the high school, we have introduced grade abatement where the focus is on a self-assessment model. There has been less emphasis put on certain Common Core Regents exams, as well as a recent increase in the number of colleges and universities who are not totally consumed with AP and SAT scores. The focus now appears to be more on what the individual student can do from a communication standpoint and how well he or she can promote themselves, which is what the real world is looking for. Finally, third idea, How do we, as a school district and as administrators, help our students to help their students develop critical skills? This is an important area because we want to encourage our teachers to take risks in order for them to help their students develop critical skills. They do not want to do this alone. They want to be reassured that they have administrative support as they go on this journey, which for many will be their first time. In order for students to develop critical skills, teachers need to do a number of things that involve some risk. We've encouraged our high school teachers to assess students on the questions they ask as well as the answers they provide. We also encourage our teachers to find a trusted colleague and team up with that person from an observation standpoint. Go in and watch your colleague teach. This main idea connects back to the first point that I discussed earlier. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Danielle Sullivan. I'm one of the assistant principals at Brewster High School, and I'm going to share 3 key ideas and why they're relevant from Chapter 6 as well. The authors convey main ideas related to the goals of our Strategic Coherence Plan for the district. Chapter 6 is especially important because the authors discuss classroom practices from the role of the teacher all the way through to assessments. Each of the main ideas are strongly intertwined and dependent on each other. The first main idea I took from Chapter 6 was the actual role of the teacher. The authors discuss the change of the teacher from instructor to facilitator. This is important because we need to develop and implement what this actually looks like in our classrooms. The teacher is now not the main source of information. We see student-directed learning in the form of Socratic seminars. The authors also discuss a Harvard physics professor, Eric Mansour, who flipped his classroom in order to shift from the ineffective stand and deliver method to student-directed student learning and increase engagement and success. Students become resources for each other. They become collaborators, critical thinkers, problem solvers who work in teams. They become original thinkers. These are the skills we would like students to leave Brewster High School with. And these are the skills directly embedded in our Strategic Coherence Plan. The great news is that we have observed these practices ongoing in our classrooms here at the high school. I've seen the flipped classroom in action in Dr. Kozlenko's physics classes. I've seen Mrs. Amuso facilitate Bidea seminars in her English classes. I've seen teams negotiating contracts in Mr. Gumas's financial and business applications class. So we are seeing these in the classroom. And the second main idea involves the critical thinking and collaborative skills that students need to exhibit to actually carry out these instructional practices in the classroom. The authors discuss the importance of critical thinking and collaborative skill acquisition, which are 2 foci of our Strategic Coherence Plan. These are important because they must be founded on social emotional learning competencies. This is crucial because at the early grade levels, students practice these competencies every day. And as they move into the secondary levels, research suggests that students are less connected to these competencies, therefore being less connected to schools. So on the secondary level, this is important that students thrive when they feel their opinions matter, and neurologically they are more engaged. The third main idea centers around assessments, as Mr. Stack had spoke about. The authors actually write about relevant assessments. And what happens now is we have these instructional practices in the classroom. We have the skills the students are working on. How do we assess what the students are learning? Research suggests through this book that assessments which have purpose and use evidence are of greater value to teachers and students. Giving students choices to demonstrate what they know enables a greater connection and helps to build trust between the student and the teacher. The standard assessments today play to create inequalities in education, and this is one of the main ideas that the authors are actually conveying about the assessments. Giving students choices such as projects, which we are beginning to see throughout the classrooms, conveys more learning, more engagement, and more perseverance, and more value that the students themselves are placing in their education. Chapter 6 really breaks down the entire pedagogy of the classroom instruction and the three main ideas of relevant assessments, critical thinking skill acquisition, and the teacher's role changing in the classroom really are the main ideas that I feel were so important in this chapter. Thank you.
Chapter 7, A New Vision for Education.
Hello, this is Kathy Culligan, Director of Human Resources.
And Michelle Gosh, Assistant Superintendent.
And we are going to share 3 key ideas and why they are relevant from Chapter 7. Idea 1. Throughout the book, the authors have described the new skills that matter most today. Content knowledge is not as important as it was in the past because you can Google everything. What matters today is what you can do with what you know. Of course, our students will continue to need content knowledge, but they will also need to develop the skill and the will to ask new questions, solve new problems, and create new knowledge. Content knowledge, skill, and will is the foundation of learning in the 21st century. This is important because if students are intrinsically motivated, they will continue to acquire new skills and content knowledge throughout their lives, enabling them to thrive in the innovation era.
So in terms of applying this key idea leads us to think about the kinds of opportunities that students have in terms of the curriculum, instruction, and assessment that they experience on a daily basis. We are looking to infuse opportunities for students K-12 that de-emphasize the central role of content and instead utilizes content as a way for students to think critically, collaborate effectively with one another, and to be the creative problem solvers that we will need to tackle the issues of this century.
Idea 2, successful change processes occur when a respected cross-section of the community can do the following. Explain the urgency for change, form a shared vision of the priority skills students need in a future world that bears little resemblance to the past, assess the school's effectiveness in helping students develop priority skills, seek student input and identify incremental steps to improve outcomes, and empower teachers and students to design, test, and implement solutions. This is important because real change won't happen at a school without a sense of urgency and a shift in culture.
So throughout the system, we are currently engaged in the first part of that idea, which is explaining the urgency for change. As we mentioned in the preface of this series of podcasts, a representative group of constituents met last year to identify the cross-cutting skills that are identified within our Strategic Coherence Plan, which are broken down into the categories of cognitive and non-cognitive skills. So this book, Most Likely to Succeed, helps us make the case for shifting our focus from what our current practice is to fostering those skills K-12 across our content areas. So in an effort to make this case, the book studies that we are engaged in currently across the system have been thrilling to be a part of. We have a really reflective group of practitioners that only want the best for our students and want to do whatever they need to do in order to prepare our students for what await them after they leave us. We have discussed in these groups how we have a number of teachers that are taking innovative risks and are shifting their pedagogy in the way that is described in the book. But what we need to do is to work together to make sure that it is more systemic K-12 throughout our curriculum, instruction, assessment, and professional development. So the professional development aspect of this is especially important because we need to make sure that we provide examples of what these skills look like developmentally across content areas. Another exciting piece of this work is what we've done with the rubrics that have been provided by Ed Leader 21. This is important because these rubrics provide definitions of critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and creative problem solving. So just this week we met with a number of the liaisons K-12 to take stock of where we are within our curriculum, instruction, assessment, professional development, and learning environment. And the liaisons will be taking this work back to their departments to continue this conversation and the examination of where we are currently. It really is exciting work to be part of.
This change is challenging for parents also. As parents, we are genetically programmed to fight for our children's survival, to go all out to raise a hardworking, straight-A child who goes onto a well-known college and then onto a great life. That's the American dream. But in our current education system, most of what a student does in the higher grades is pointless. Is a child trained to get through day after day of mind-numbing, low-level tasks really better off? This is teaching our children to accept that life is all about jumping through hoops, following instructions, and responding to approval from others. This is important because our current education system is killing our children's innovation, creativity, and independence of thought, and putting our children at risk in the innovation era.
And that is a case that Dintersmith and Wagner make in the book, and really not, nothing that's critical of our current system, but the system, throughout the United States. So it's true that this issue is well beyond Brewster, and really the systems and structures that students will enter once they leave us also need to enter into this conversation, which of course we have minimal to no control over. But here's what we were saying. We think and we believe that if we integrate the skills of critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, communication, civic and ethical responsibility, social emotional balance, and flexibility and adaptability into our curriculum, instruction, assessment, professional development, and learning environments, then the assessments will take care of themselves. And more importantly, students will be able to think on their feet in novel situations and will collaboratively problem solve and be able to communicate their solutions to an authentic audience. I would venture to guess that most parents, if not all, would be happy if their son or daughter was proficient in those skills and were able to apply them in the world that they live in. So that's our thoughts for Chapter 7. We'd like to thank you for listening today. Hopefully you were able to listen to the summaries of the other chapters that the administrators submitted as well. So we look forward to continuing this conversation and to producing more of these podcasts in the future to keep you up to date on the work within our system. And as always, if you have questions or comments or you would like to discuss further, please do not hesitate to contact us.
Closing remarks.
We hope that you have a chance to have conversations with your colleagues about these ideas from the book Most Likely to Succeed, and how the cross-cutting skills identified in our Strategic Coherence Plan look in your curriculum, instruction, assessment, professional learning, and learning environment.
If you are an educator in the district, we hope that the big ideas that we identified from the book Most Likely to Succeed will encourage you to have conversations with your colleagues about ways that your department or team want to make adjustments in what you teach, how you assess student learning, how your classroom is arranged, and what professional learning you want, so that all students become critical thinkers, problem solvers, astute communicators, and collaborators who persevere, are resilient, adaptive, flexible, and become civic-minded and ethically responsible citizens.
If you are a parent of a student in the district, we hope that you expose your children at home and elsewhere to activities that foster the further development of these 21st century skills. Children need to develop a passion for something that excites and motivates them, and they need to become curious about the world around them.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you in a book study.